Hello, so this is Mammalogy exam 2. So echolocation. So it's very similar to sonar that transmits signals and receives echoes. It's a physiological process that uses signals and echoes to locate and detect objects or prey through the reflection of sound waves bouncing back to the emitter from the object or prey. So there are two types of signals that are produced, clicks from the nasal passages and signals from the larynx. So both the mammal orders that utilize this is order Chiroptera, and then order Sarcomorpha. So the species I chose is Percival's trident bat. They're a specialized bat in the sub-Saharan Africa with a core distribution in South Africa. Its natural habitats are subtropical or tropical dry forests, dry savanna, and caves. So it's named for its trident-shaped leaf nose. Um, and What's special about them is they have the highest known echolocation. While their hearing range has not been quite measured, it's inferred to be somewhere between 110 to 200 hertz based on the maximum and peak frequencies of their echolocation calls. So bat listening abilities are very closely linked to their ecology. So what they eat, how they hunt, and their echolocation calls. So bats usually have two peaks in hearing sensitivity, one at lower frequencies and another at higher frequencies. The higher frequency peak usually corresponds to the frequency range of the bat's own echolocation calls and is also highly sensitive to loudness. So they use the intensity of sounds to calculate the distance and size of objects. So the frequency of echolocation, the interaction between the echolocating bats and typhanid moths. So it's a great example of the predator-prey coevolution. Moths will fly away or pursue series of complex flight maneuvers to get away. And moths are best at 20 and between 20 and 50 kHz, coinciding with the range of peak frequencies of most bats, but frequency above 65 usually falls off sharply. Okay, so the order ungulates, I chose the mountain goat. Um, so both females and males have beards, short tails, and black horns with woolly grayish white coats covered by an outer layer of longer hollow guard hairs that protect them from the elements. So the coats help them withstand temperatures as low as negative 51 degrees and 99-mile-per-hour winds. So they have oval hooves well suited for climbing steep rocky slopes, which pitches exceeding 60 degrees, with inner pads that provide traction and cloven hooves that can spread apart. The tips of their feet also have sharp dew claws that keep them from slipping. So they have a very stocky build with powerful shoulder muscles that help propel them up steep slopes. Unlike the heavy skulls of wild sheep, the skull of the mountain goats is light and fragile. Males are bigger than females and may have longer horns and longer beards, and they can actually be aged by counting the annual rings around the horns. So the first ring is formed in the second winter's growth and age up between 22 and 24 months and one is formed after each next spring. So the native range of the mountain goat extends from western Montana, southern Idaho, and the mountains as far as of Alaska, and they occupy alpine and subalpine areas having steep rocky terrain. And so their woolly coats actually do not provide as much insulation as the coats of true Arctic animals, but can withstand negative 4 degrees. So this is the map. This is where their native region is. So their social structure is primarily matriarchal. It's characterized by the fusion fission social system, and females do not associate at random. So through studies, they've seen that similarity of reproductive status greatly influences the strength of the female associations. So immature females associate strongly with their mothers, whereas adult females associated mainly with females of similar reproductive status because they share similar needs during lactation. So females were more observable than males because they occurred in larger groups. Um, and they utilize less densely vegetated terrain at most times of the year and spent more time being active. Group composition affected habitat selection, so male-only groups displayed far less frequent choice of habitat than their female counterparts. This may be attributed to the dominant status and higher production requirements of reproductive females, and male-only groups spent more time resting than feeding or traveling. So their unique behavior is pretty much their salt lick migration. So the salt licks are important to mountain goats in spring and summer, and they frequently travel several miles to reach these licks. Um, so the increase in sodium consumption in spring and autumn was due to loss of sodium by the fecal root following a change in diet to new lush vegetation. So concentrated resources or hotspots within an individual's usual home range would be strong determinants of movement behavior. So they have developed a strong behavioral traditions visiting this mineral lake over many decades, and within a season, male or females have different seasonal patterns of visitation, which while traveling in distinct group sizes. So the unique nocturnal pattern may be caused by proximate anthropogenic factors like highway disturbance. The temporal patterns of mineral lake use by male and female goats and their behavioral adaptations they display highlight the importance of these mineral lakes for this population. So reproduction. November is the beginning of the rut, but observed matings can be seen as late as January 3rd. The gestation period is around 150 days, 178 days. Mountain goats, the kids frequently are born in late May or early June. So single births are most common, although twins are not absolutely uncommon. And several sets of triplets were reported during the rapid population growth during the introduction of mountain goats into the crazy mountains of Montana. Just an interesting fact too, body mass of the mountain goats may be a more important factor than the horn size for male mating success. So they are listed as least concern by the IUCN Red list due to its large populations, wide distribution, and active management. However, some populations are declining in some areas, and there are a number of factors that contribute to their vulnerability. So threats, hunting and trapping, and human intrusions and disturbances. Thankfully, these animals are largely protected from threats due to the inaccessible nature of their habitat, the steep slopes, the terrain. The species is hunted, but regulations of both the range states have stabilized past declines. And mountain goats are more sensitive to human disturbances than most other ungulates. They are particularly sensitive to harassment from aircraft. So increasing aircraft use, particularly helicopters for industrial and recreational purposes on mountain goat habitat is a major concern for their conservation. So I selected the mountain goat because when my family and I traveled to Majorca, Spain in January of this year, we visited the Torrent de Paris and took the Sa Colabra, which is the snake road within the mountains, and we saw a lot of wild goats, and I realized they're the Majorcan wild goats that we saw. I was fascinated in their skill to execute the cliffs, making it look so graceful and easy. So my invasive species, I did the nutria. So despite being called swamp rats, nutria are not rats. They can grow between 17 and 25 inches long and weigh up to 15 to 22 pounds, pretty much the size of a raccoon. Their most conspicuous identifying features are their white whiskers and large rounded tail. The nutria look more like a cross between a small beaver and a giant rat with two large orange front teeth, and their hind feet are partially webbed with one free digit, unlike the beaver that has fully webbed hind feet. So they breed year-round and can have up to 3 litters a year with between 2 and 13 offspring, allowing the populations to rapidly grow. So gestation period is about 4 months, and pups will nurse for about 7 to 8 weeks and stay with their mom for around 10 weeks. But they are actually, pups can also survive on their own when they're as young as 5 days old. So they live in groups consisting of 2 to 13 individuals. Young adult males are usually solitary. So their native range is South America, specifically Brazil and Bolivia and South Brazil. Its natural habitat is along rivers and lakes and in marshes and estuaries, prefers freshwater over saltwater. So their non-native range, they're invasive in Europe, Asia, and Africa. They were introduced to South Korea across 4 major river basins in 1985 to establish fur farms. So decrease in the price of fur and anti-fur campaigns resulted in a failure of nutria farming. So this is a whole nutria fur trade and why they became invasive. They were historically valued for its fur. So they were intentional introduction to wetland habitats worldwide. And these are upheld from the Nutrium. So the animal is considered a pest or nuisance in many areas around its native range due to its feeding and burrowing habits, where the populations have grown and their presence have disrupted the native ecosystem. Nutria are now considered one of the most ecologically harmful invasive species on the planet because they're capable of rapid reproduction and highly adaptive. And capable of increasing their range to habitats, and they have detrimental effects. Area of concern. Area of concern. So they have ample evidence that nutria are capable of destroying ecologically valuable wetland and marsh habitat, as well as creating economic costs through crop loss, damage to embankments and dams, and potential flooding. So they present a further risk as invasive species as carriers of parasites as well and dangerous bacteria, which can be zoonotic and spread to humans through biting or contact with other animals or feces. And then they can also spread to livestock or pets. Eradication. So the goal of eradication, populations are detected and addressed at an early stage. Climate change has also been associated with increased range and severity of invasive species. So populations are likely remain low in Washington state as opposed to Louisiana and Maryland. So the jaguar. So the reintroduction of the jaguar. Jaguars living once again in Arizona and New Mexico will add a distinct and unique habitat type to the kaleidoscope of ecosystems where jaguars occur, thus enhancing ecological representation for the species. So representation, redundancy, and resiliency are used by as a cornerstone of its species status assessment framework to measure the health of the species as a whole. They're also central to definitions of what means to successfully conserve a species. So they could improve the ecosystem quality by adding an additional apex predator. Um, apex predator. And these ecosystem zone represents a meeting point of subtropical and temperate species with cool, moist pine forests above dry juniper, piney oak woodlands. These forests are open and park-like where the natural fire regime is maintained. So this all equals an ideal habitat for the species. So establishing a population entirely within the bounds of the United States would add to the resilience of the species, enabling the U.S. people and its agencies to contribute directly to its recovery, since Americans caused the loss of this ecologically unique population, restoring jaguars to this land. It would help remedy the injustice caused by its extinction to this region. So it could also provide an opportunity for indigenous tribes to be active in this restoration as well. So the history. So was the species historically part of the fauna, and have the threats caused been extirpated? So the male and female jaguars inhabited the central mountains of Arizona and New Mexico up until the 1960s, suggesting there was a long-term resident population. So extracting from their online database, we found about 16 independent jaguar observations between 1890 and 1964 in the region, including males, females, and females with cubs. So the 4 observations have well-attested physical evidence, including the type specimen for the subspecies. So jaguars no longer inhabit this area, most assuredly because they were hunted. They were hunted and trapped. And actually, a U.S. government hunter killed the last known jaguar in this region on the White Mountain Apache Reservation in January of 1964. Okay, so the proposed reintroduction area is vast, covered with suitable vegetation and well populated with prey, and this area is larger than the jaguar conservation units mapped in adjacent Mexico, including units mapped in Jalisco and Sonora that support viable jaguar populations on much smaller land bases. Can support around 69 to 106 jaguars. So the results suggest that once established, a population would be viable for at least 100 years, with periodic introductions to maintain genetic diversity. So there's rugged habitat, adequate water, provides prey and suitable cover, and it's mostly free from human disturbance. And adding an apex predator could, in theory, change the mix of small to mid-sized prey by suppressing small to mid-sized predators such as bobcats, raccoons, and coyotes, in turn increasing numbers of their prey such as turkeys or rabbits. So adding or removing predators from the ecosystem shifts predators' gill dynamics. Jaguars directly compete with cougars in northern Mexico, though not to the extent of competitive inclusion. If jaguars kleptoparasitize cougars, then cougars may kill more prey to replace lost food and switch to other prey items. Jaguars might also compete with non-felid predators such as black bears. Okay, so social priorities. The question, so although support for the environment has dipped as low as 50%, studies have say over the last 5 years it has been increasing nationwide. In a 2020 poll by Colorado College, 72% surveyed Arizonans and New Mexicans considered themselves conservationists, which is great. As a practical matter, it would be the authorities at the tribal, federal, state, and local levels who will need to approve, manage, and support jaguar reintroduction at specific times and places, balancing the needs of the jaguar with other species of conservation concern. So over the longer term, politics and social societal attitudes about wildlife and animal welfare will increase and influence who makes what decisions. So the impact on demographics. So there will be increases in income, education, urbanization seem to be a leading to a generational switch from valuing domination of nature to mutualism in the Western US states, which may influence opinions and decisions about the environment now and into the future. So impact on livelihoods. So these changes in economic activity represent a historic shift from the three C's, copper, cotton, and cattle, that traditionally characterize Arizona's economy. Um, so in 2017, 5% were in farming ranching occupations, 12% of non-farm jobs, which is like forestry, fishing, and less than 1% of non-farm jobs. So the wilderness complex provides a roadless, well-protected habitat block, an area of high-quality potential habitat, and potentially a site for reintroductions. So no jaguar attacks on people have been recorded in 21st century, but they're likely to kill livestock occasionally, unfortunately. So the landscape of fear, the spatially explicit distribution on how an animal's perception of predators risk shifts across space. It's a key consideration of wildlife management and ecology. So ranching, hunting, and recreation. So ranching, minor industry in the area. Jaguar predation is still a significant financial issue. For hunting, interestingly, research suggests that adding a new predator that might actually make deer easier to find. Adding jaguars could alter the landscape of fear, which I explained previously. The best strategy for deer to avoid nocturnal ambush predators, such as the jaguars, to avoid thick and dark cover at night, forcing deer into the more open areas. And then human hunters are more successful. And recreation. So apex predator ecotourism market around the jaguar, America's great cat, could possibly generate new jobs and incomes as for other species. So tourism. So how could jaguars return? So the local attitude equals first order business ecological research to document prey base and assess potential interactions with other predators, wild prey, livestock, and human hunters. Sourcing individuals for reintroduction. It will require concerted cooperation between federal, state, and tribal agencies and civil society. So face less social resistance if the population were designated as a non-essential experimental population by the US FWS. So just as an example, the Mexican wolf. Um, so the collaboration between the US FWS, state game agencies, tribes, nonprofits, and ranchers, it's a coexistence program that helps ranchers minimize predation through herd management. So habitat connectivity, degree to which the land landscapes facilitates or impedes an animal movement and other ecological processes. Habitat connectivity severely constricted to existing population of south of U.S.-Mexico border. A natural reestablishment unlikely in coming decades, and active translocations required. So the most important factor, I think, is the why. So explaining the reasons behind this case can alter opinion, burden the public's mind on a controversial matter. So educating the public is number one, creating awareness regarding wildlife conservation. I wish the paper discussed more regarding involving the public in this reintroduction. So what I found most interesting about this article and surprising is how it seems so very possible for this reintroduction to happen, yet it has not. I feel as though the supporting reasons for the cons outweigh the pros, yet there are blockades being the biggest interference, i.e. the natural borders between Mexico and US, ultimately halts the entire movement, possibly for over 100 years. I've been fascinated with wildlife reintroduction. While living in Glasgow, I learned the sad history of the long decline in an entire nation's wildlife. So Scotland consciously exterminate all these predators, the bears, lynx, wolves, due to potential damage and danger upon the livestock and the people. It was wild hiking in the Highlands, not having to worry about any predators, and sad knowing the only observable wildlife was deer and sheep. And reading the beautiful novel Once There Were Wolves by Charlotte McConaughey only heightened my magnetism in the fascinating, controversial matters of wildlife reintroduction. Thanks so much.